The massive space station spun slowly against the backdrop of glittering stars, its silver arms stretching out like a delicate snowflake in space. Inside, beings from 100 different worlds walked, crawled, and floated through its curved corridors. Today was different, though. Today, the station buzzed with nervous energy because the humans were coming. In the main meeting chamber, Council Member Red's antenna twitched as he studied the data again. Their world should be impossible to live on, he muttered, his transparent wings shimmering with worry. Look at these readings. Extreme temperature changes, powerful storms, crushing gravity, and dangerous levels of oxygen. How can anything survive there? Council Member Green, whose crystal-like body sparkled under the chamber's soft lights, moved closer to the display. That's exactly why we're worried. These humans aren't just surviving, they're thriving. And now they want to join the Galactic Council. The chamber doors slid open with a soft hiss. A tall figure walked in, moving with an ease that made several council members step back. The human looked too solid, too dense compared to the delicate forms around him. His name was Jack, and he wore the simple blue uniform of Earth's Space Force with quiet confidence. "Welcome to Station 7, Red said, trying to hide his nervousness. "We trust your journey was comfortable." He remembered the reports about humans actually enjoying the feeling of acceleration that made most species pass out. Jack smiled, showing his teeth, a gesture that made two junior council members quickly move behind a pillar. The ride was smooth, though I wouldn't have minded a bit more speed. He looked around the chamber with obvious interest. "Beautiful station you have here. The artificial gravity is impressive, though it feels a bit light." Green's crystalline form flickered with surprise. "Light? We maintain it at 40% of standard council gravity for comfort. Your species lives under 3 times this pressure constantly." "Oh yeah, Earth's got a bit more pull to her," Jack shrugged, a casual movement that rippled muscles evolved to fight against crushing gravity. "You get used to it. Though I have to say, this makes me feel like I could jump over these pillars easily." The council members exchanged worried looks. Red cleared his throat, a sound like wind chimes in a breeze. "Yes, well, about your application for council membership. We have some concerns." Jack's expression remained friendly, but his eyes sharpened. Several members felt an instinctive urge to flee. Their species recognized a predator's gaze when they saw one. "Concerns? About what?" Green moved forward, trying to be diplomatic. "Your species has achieved remarkable things, but your methods are unusual. Just last month, a human crew saved a mining station by..." Green checked his notes, manually restarting a fusion reactor during an active meltdown. "Oh, that," Jack chuckled. "That was Tom's team. They just vented the coolant, waited until the core started to go critical, then kicked it back on at just the right moment. Basic restart procedure." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Red's antenna had gone completely still, a sign of extreme shock in his species. "Basic procedure. Your species regularly risks nuclear annihilation as a maintenance technique." "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds bad," Jack said. "But sometimes you've got to think outside the box. Speaking of which," he walked over to the chamber's main window, looking out at the station's massive solar arrays. "I noticed your power output is running at about 60%. I've got some ideas about that." "The arrays are operating within safe parameters," Green said quickly, having heard stories about human ideas. "Sure, but you could get way more juice if you adjusted the angle and ran them hotter," Jack said, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "Here, let me show you. Mind if I borrow your datapad?" As Jack reached for the device, Red felt a strange sensation, like watching a natural disaster about to happen, but in slow motion. He'd read the reports about humans, about their tendency to solve problems in ways that seemed to defy both physics and common sense. He'd thought they were exaggerated. They weren't. Jack was already typing calculations into the datapad, muttering about efficiency ratios and heat tolerances. The human's eyes had that dangerous gleam of inspiration that, unknown to the council members, had preceded some of humanity's greatest achievements and most spectacular disasters. Welcome to the galaxy's new normal, Red thought. The Deathworlders had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. After the tense first meeting, the council assigned Blue to watch over Jack. Blue belonged to a species that looked like living glass, with swirling colors inside their transparent body. They weren't sure if this assignment was a promotion or a punishment. And this is what humans call arm wrestling. Blue asked, watching a recording Jack had brought from Earth. Their inner colors swirled with confusion and worry. You deliberately test your strength against each other. For fun. Jack sat back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. They were in the station's cultural exchange lounge, surrounded by artifacts from 100 worlds. It's just a game, Blue. Nobody gets hurt. Well, usually. He grinned at Blue's changing colors. Want to try? Absolutely not. Blue's body flashed a bright yellow, a sign of alarm. My species would shatter under the force you consider casual entertainment. Jack laughed and reached for his drink, a special import from Earth that the station's safety officer had labeled as potentially hazardous. Fair enough, though you should see what we do for real fun. Ever heard of skydiving? Before Blue could answer, the station's lights flickered. A low rumble passed through the floor, making the artifacts on the shelves rattle. Blue immediately flowed into their safety position, a tight crystalline ball. Jack stood up, his body tensing like a coiled spring. That wasn't normal. The station's AI spoke through the comm system. Alert. Primary gravity generator malfunction. Backup systems engaged at 30% capacity. All non-essential personnel please return to quarters. Blue uncurled slightly. We should evacuate this section. The backup systems are not designed for long-term operation. Jack wasn't listening. He had walked over to a maintenance panel and was studying the station schematics displayed there. The primary generators in section C7, right? Near the core. Yes, but only certified technicians can. Blue stopped as Jack pulled off his uniform jacket. What are you doing? Going to take a look, Jack said, rolling up his sleeves. I worked on similar systems back on Mars. The gravity's already dropping. Feel how light everything's getting. He was right. Objects were starting to drift slightly when moved. The maintenance tubes to C7 will be dangerous, Blue protested, following Jack as he strode down the corridor. They're not shielded against core radiation. Jack stopped at a storage locker and started pulling out tools. How long until the backup systems fail? At current load, 4 hours? Maybe less. And how long until certified help arrives? Blue's colors darkened. The nearest support ship is 6 hours away. Right then, Jack grabbed what looked to Blue like a dangerously primitive toolkit. Time for some human engineering. They reached the maintenance tube entrance. Warning signs in 12 languages covered the door. The radiation warning made Blue's entire body pulse with fear. The levels in there are lethal. For your species, yeah. Jack was already keying in an override code. But humans, we evolved with background radiation. Plus, we're really good at healing radiation damage. Did you know our cells can repair DNA breaks? Blue hadn't known that, and wasn't sure they wanted to. The council will not approve. Better to ask forgiveness than permission, Jack said cheerfully. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his drink container. Here, hold my beer. Blue automatically accepted the container, their crystalline arms cradling it carefully. Then they processed what Jack had said. In their brief time studying humans, Blue had learned that this particular phrase often preceded events that defied both logic and survival odds. Jack, wait. But the human was already climbing into the tube, whistling what he had earlier called a working tune. Through the open door, Blue could see Jack moving with practiced ease through the low-gravity environment, using handholds to pull himself along. The radiation warning indicators were flashing red, but Jack seemed as relaxed as if he were taking a walk in a park. "I'll be back in 20 minutes, Jack called back. "If anyone asks, tell them I'm just doing a routine inspection." Blue looked down at the beer in their hands, then back at the tube where Jack had disappeared. Their colors swirled in a pattern that, in their species, meant something between admiration and horror. They had a feeling that routine meant something very different to humans than it did to the rest of the galaxy. Blue paced outside the maintenance tube entrance, their crystalline form shifting between worried purple and anxious green. 15 minutes had passed since Jack entered the radiation-filled tunnel. The station's gravity continued to fluctuate, making loose objects drift eerily in the air. The comm system crackled. "Hey Blue, you still there?" Jack's voice sounded oddly cheerful for someone swimming in lethal radiation. "Yes, are you all right? The sensors show radiation levels are still rising." "Yeah, about that." There was a clanking sound in the background. "Good news and bad news. Good news is I found the problem. Bad news is it's not the gravity generator. It's the station's defensive shields." Blue's colors went completely white. "The shields. But the raiders haven't been seen in this sector for months." As if answering, the station's AI blared. "Warning. 3 unidentified vessels approaching. Hostile intent detected. Shield capacity at 20% and falling." The maintenance tube's door slid open, and Jack emerged. His skin was slightly red, like he'd spent too long in the sun, but he looked energized rather than sick. "They sabotaged our shields through the gravity systems. Pretty clever, actually. We must inform the council." Blue started to float toward the corridor, but Jack caught their arm. "No time. Those raiders, they're not here to talk. They're waiting for the shields to fail so they can board us." Jack was already moving, pulling himself along the corridor with practiced ease in the low gravity. "We need to get to the defense control room." Blue followed, trying to keep their form stable in the shifting gravity. The Council's emergency protocols state that in case of raid attempts, we should seal all sensitive areas and wait for military support, which will arrive in, Jack checked his wrist display, 5.5 hours. By then, the raiders will have stripped this station to its bones. He stopped at an intersection, looking both ways. "We need to think like humans. That's what I'm afraid of," Blue muttered, their colors showing swirls of resignation. They reached the defense control room to find it already sealed. Through the transparent walls, they could see the station's security team, all members of traditionally peaceful species, trying to coordinate a response. Their movements were becoming increasingly panicked as the shield readings continued to drop. Jack studied the situation, then turned to Blue with a gleam in his eye that made their crystalline form shiver. "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." When you say that, it usually means something incredibly dangerous is about to happen. Remember how I said the gravity generators and shields were connected? Jack was already pulling tools from his pockets. What if we reversed the polarity of the gravity field and channeled it through the shield grid? Blue's colors cycled through several shades of disbelief. That would create a gravitational shockwave. It could tear the station apart. Or, Jack held up a finger, grinning, it could create a temporary gravity well that would trap the raiders' ships. Their engines aren't designed for sudden gravitational stress. We could disable them before they even reach us. The calculations would have to be perfect, Blue protested. One mistake, and we could implode the station. And we'd need access to both the shield controls and the gravity systems simultaneously. Jack's grin got wider. Good thing we have someone who's just been in the gravity control tubes and knows exactly how they work. He started typing on the door's control panel. And someone else who can flow through small spaces and reach the shield controls. Blue realized what he was suggesting. No. That would be against at least 15 Council safety protocols. Blue, Jack placed a hand on their crystalline shoulder, his expression serious for once. Sometimes the safest rules are the ones you break to save lives. Right now, we have 3 ships full of raiders about to board a station packed with civilians. We can either follow protocol and watch them take everything, or we can do something crazy and save everyone. He pulled his emergency flask from his pocket. A backup to the beer Blue was still somehow holding. So what do you say? Ready to think like a human? Blue looked at the flask, then at the approaching raiders' ships visible through the station's windows. Their form shifted to a determined blue shade that humans hadn't seen before. Hold your beer, Jack. I believe I have some protocols to break. The defense control room erupted into chaos when the security team saw Jack overriding their systems. 3 different species tried to stop him, but in the lowered gravity, their movements were slow and clumsy. Jack simply floated over their heads, typing commands into his portable device. 2 minutes until shield failure, the station's AI announced calmly. Blue had already flowed through a maintenance duct, their crystalline forms squeezing through gaps barely wider than a finger. They emerged inside the shield control room, right next to the main console. Their normal transparent form had shifted to match the color of the walls, a trick their species used to avoid predators. I'm in position, Blue whispered into their communicator, though I still think this is madness. Madness is what we humans do best, Jack replied cheerfully. He was now hanging upside down from a ceiling pipe, still typing. The security team had given up trying to reach him and were now watching in confused horror, ready for some physics-defying fun. Blue's colors swirled with nervous energy. The raiders' ships are launching boarding pods. We have maybe 90 seconds. Perfect timing. Jack finished his calculations. Okay, when I say now, push all shield power to the forward arrays. I'm going to sink it with a gravity pulse that'll make a black hole look gentle. A black hole. What's a black hole? Never mind. Just trust me. And whatever happens, don't let the safety systems kick in. The raiders' ships were close enough now that Blue could see their weapons powering up through the station's windows. Their dark shapes looked like hungry predators closing in on prey. 30 seconds to shield failure, the AI reminded everyone. Jack's fingers flew over his device, diverting power from life support and artificial gravity. The station's lights dimmed, and everything not bolted down began to float, routing it through the gravitational field generators. A deep hum filled the station, making Blue's crystalline form vibrate uncomfortably. Reversing polarity. Warning signals blared from every console. Red emergency lights started flashing. The security team was yelling in 6 different languages. Now, Jack shouted. Blue slammed their appendages onto the shield controls, forcing all power forward. Their crystalline body reflected the chaos of flashing lights around them like a disco ball gone mad. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the view outside the windows bent. Stars appeared to shift position as space itself warped around the station. The raiders' ships, caught in mid-approach, suddenly jerked like fish on hooks. It's working. Jack whooped with joy. The gravity field is catching them in a feedback loop with the shields. Blue watched in amazement as the raiders' ships struggled against the invisible force. Their engines flared bright enough to leave spots in Blue's vision, but they couldn't break free. The ships began to spin, caught in a gravitational dance they hadn't planned for. Warning, the AI announced. Structural integrity at 60%, 50%, 40%. The station groaned around them. Panels buckled as conflicting gravitational forces pulled at them. In the corridors, people of all species clung to whatever they could grab as gravity shifted wildly. Just a few more seconds, Jack muttered. His face was covered in sweat, but his hands remained steady on the controls. The raiders' engines should overload in 3, 2, 1. Bright flashes lit up space as the raiders' engine cores shut down, unable to handle the gravitational stress. Their ships went dark, now floating helplessly in the artificial gravity well. Kill it, Jack yelled. Cut power now. Blue released the shield controls. Jack slammed his hand down on his device. The gravitational forces vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. The station creaked and shuddered, then settled back to normal. In the sudden quiet, Blue could hear their crystalline form humming from residual energy. They looked out at the disabled raider ships, then at the shocked faces of the security team, and finally at Jack, who was still hanging upside down with a huge grin on his face. "That," Blue said slowly, their colors shifting to a shade that indicated both terror and exhilaration, "was the most horrifying and amazing thing I have ever been part of." Jack finally dropped down from the ceiling, landing lightly in the restored gravity. "Welcome to the human way of problem-solving." He reached for his flask. "I think we've earned this drink." The council chamber was packed. News of the incident had spread faster than a solar flare through the station's communication networks. Jack stood in the center of the room, looking remarkably calm for someone facing the angry stares of 12 different species representatives. Blue floated nearby, their crystalline forms still showing traces of stress colors from their adventure. "Let me understand this correctly." Council member Red's antenna twitched rapidly. "You deliberately created an artificial gravity anomaly, risking the entire station's structural integrity to capture 3 raider ships." "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds bad," Jack said, unconsciously echoing his words from their first meeting. "I prefer to think of it as creative problem-solving." Green's crystalline form sparkled with barely contained fury. "You disabled life support." "Only for 2 minutes," Jack pointed out. "Most species can handle that just fine. We humans can go 3 minutes without air, you know." The chamber erupted in horrified whispers. Blue noticed several council members making their species equivalent of protective gestures. "And you?" Red turned to Blue. "You assisted in this successful defense of the station." Blue's colors shifted to a confident azure that surprised even them. "Yes, I did. And I would do it again." Silence fell over the chamber. No one had ever heard a member of Blue's traditionally peaceful species speak so boldly. Jack smiled proudly at his friend. The human's influence was clearly rubbing off. "The station suffered structural damage," another council member pointed out. Their slug-like form quivered with disapproval. "Minor damage," Jack corrected. "Already fixed it this morning." Turns out humans are pretty good at repair work too. Something about growing up on a planet that's constantly trying to kill you makes you handy with tools. The council members exchanged worried looks. They had hoped that exposure to galactic civilization would make humans more cautious. Instead, it seemed humans were making other species more adventurous. "What about the raiders?" Green asked, changing the subject. "Safely locked up in the station's brig," Jack replied. "Their ships are impounded, and we found evidence linking them to 6 other attacks in this sector. Turns out they've been studying station designs, looking for weaknesses in shield and gravity systems." This caused another stir in the chamber. Red's antenna went still, a sign of deep thought. "And your solution to this careful technical sabotage was to create a temporary gravitational anomaly that shouldn't have been physically possible." "Sometimes the best way to deal with careful planning is complete unpredictability," Jack said. "That's another human specialty. We call it thinking outside the box." Blue floated forward. "If I may speak." They waited for Red's nod. "I've spent time studying humans since Jack arrived. Yes, their methods seem dangerous, even insane by our standards. But look at the results. No lives lost. Raiders captured. Station saved. And you're different now," Green observed. "Your colors show patterns we've never seen in your species before." Blue's form rippled with pride. "Yes, humans have taught me that sometimes the safe choice isn't the right choice. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts and take risks. That's what worries us." Red sighed. "Humans seem to be contagious." Jack laughed. "You say that like it's a bad thing. Look, I get it. We humans seem reckless to you, but we've survived and thrived on a world that throws everything from earthquakes to hurricanes at us. We've learned to adapt, to think fast, to try the impossible when the possible isn't working." He gestured at the station around them. Your civilization is amazing. You've built wonders we humans can barely imagine. But sometimes you need people who are willing to break the rules, to try the crazy solution, to say, hold my beer, and dive into danger. Blue's colors shifted to match Jack's uniform, a deliberate show of solidarity. He's right. The galaxy is changing. Maybe we need to change with it. The council members looked at each other. The human way was spreading, for better or worse. And deep down, some of them were starting to wonder if that might not be such a bad thing after all. A week after the Raider incident, the station had changed. Where once there were only careful, measured movements in the corridors, now some aliens walked with a hint of human swagger. The Cultural Exchange Lounge, usually quiet and formal, buzzed with excited conversations about Earth and its people. Jack sat at his usual table, surrounded by a curious crowd. Blue hovered nearby, acting as a translator when Jack's explanations confused the aliens too much. So you're saying, a small fuzzy alien leaned forward, that humans regularly jump out of flying machines. For fun. Skydiving. Yeah, it's pretty common. Jack took a sip of his drink. Though personally, I prefer rock climbing. Nothing quite like hanging from a cliff face with just your fingers keeping you from falling. The aliens shuddered collectively, but their eyes showed fascination rather than pure horror now. Is it true? Another alien asked, this one looking like a walking plant, that human children play games where they spin until they get dizzy, deliberately disrupting their balance organs. Oh man, wait until I tell you about roller coasters, Jack grinned. The resulting explanation sent half the audience slithering away in terror, while the other half moved closer, demanding details. Blue watched it all with their new, steady blue color that they'd maintained since their adventure. Other members of their species had started visiting, curious about how Blue had changed. You seem different, one of Blue's kind said, their form shifting with uncertainty. More solid. I learned something from the humans, Blue replied. Being careful is good, but being too careful means missing out on life. Sometimes you need to take a chance. Jack overheard this and smiled. He turned back to his audience, who were now asking about something called bungee jumping. The station's AI interrupted the conversations. Attention. Engineering team requests human consultation in Sector 7. That's my cue. Jack stood up. Since the Raider incident, the station's engineers had started asking for human input on various systems. They discovered that human problem-solving, while strange, often found solutions they'd never considered. Blue followed Jack to the engineering section, where they found a team of aliens staring at a malfunctioning power converter. We've tried all standard procedures, the chief engineer, a tall insectoid, clicked his mandibles nervously. But the energy flow remains unstable. Jack studied the readings, then walked around the converter, tapping it in various places. The engineering team winced at each tap, expecting disaster. You know what this reminds me of? Jack said suddenly. My old truck back on Earth. Sometimes the fuel injector would act up just like this. He pulled out his toolkit. Mind if I try something a bit unconventional? The engineers looked at each other. A month ago, they would have refused immediately. Now, the chief engineer just sighed and said, please try not to break any laws of physics this time. No promises. Jack winked and got to work. His methods looked crude to the aliens, more like surgery with a hammer than their usual precise adjustments. But 20 minutes later, the converter hummed perfectly. How? The chief engineer asked, studying the readings in disbelief. Sometimes machines just need a firm hand, Jack patted the converter, and a willingness to try things that aren't in the manual. As they left engineering, Blue noticed more aliens watching Jack with interest rather than fear. Even the maintenance robots seemed to move with more confidence around him. You're changing the station, Blue observed. Everyone's starting to think differently. Nah, Jack shook his head. They're just remembering something they forgot. Every species had to be brave once, had to try crazy things to survive and grow. Humans just never stopped doing it. They reached a viewport, looking out at the stars. In the distance, a new ship was approaching. Another human vessel, responding to the station's request for more human advisors. The galaxy's a dangerous place, Jack continued. Maybe what it needs isn't just people who can build amazing things, but people who aren't afraid to take risks to protect them. People willing to say, "Hold my beer," and dive into the impossible. Blue's colors rippled with amusement. Just wait until they meet more humans. I have a feeling the galaxy will never be the same. That's the plan. Jack grinned. That's definitely the plan. 1 month after the Raider incident, Station 7 had transformed. Humans now worked in every section, their laughter and bold ideas spreading through the station like a friendly virus. But today was special. The Galactic Council was announcing their new guidelines for human integration into the wider galaxy. The main assembly hall was packed. Jack stood near the front, wearing his dress uniform. Blue floated beside him, their crystalline form glowing with excitement. Around them, beings from across the galaxy waited to hear the Council's decision. Council Member Red stepped up to the speaking platform. His antennae were steady now and he looked at Jack, showing how much things had changed. After extensive study of human behavior, Red began, and particularly the recent events on this station, we have reached several conclusions. The crowd went quiet. Even the station's ambient hum seemed to soften. First, Red continued, humans are indeed dangerous. He paused as worried whispers spread through the crowd, but not in the way we feared. They are dangerous to problems we thought unsolvable, dangerous to limitations we thought unchangeable, and most importantly, dangerous to those who threaten peace in our galaxy. Jack tried to keep a straight face, but his proud grin broke through anyway. Therefore, Red's antenna twitched with what might have been amusement. We are implementing new protocols. Every major station and settlement will now include human advisors. Their role will be to provide alternative perspectives on problems. Blue's colors swirled with joy. They had helped write some of these new protocols, explaining how human unpredictability could be a strength rather than a weakness. Furthermore, Red continued, we are establishing new training programs. Other species who wish to learn human problem-solving methods may now do so in a controlled environment. The crowd buzzed with excitement. Already, many species had shown interest in learning what they called the human way. But most importantly, Red raised his voice slightly. We have learned something valuable from our human friends. Sometimes, the safest path is not the best path. Sometimes, you must take risks to protect what matters. Jack watched as Red pulled out a small container, a human drink container. In recognition of this wisdom, Red held up the container. I believe the humans have a traditional phrase for such moments. The entire hall turned to look at Jack. He stepped forward, grinning widely now. Hold my beer, Jack said clearly, his voice carrying through the hall. The phrase rippled through the crowd, repeated in dozens of languages. Some species couldn't even drink, but they understood the meaning. Here was a moment when bold action was needed. Red turned to the hall's main screen, which showed a map of the galaxy. We face many challenges. Pirates in the outer systems, resource shortages in developing sectors, natural disasters on countless worlds. But now, he looked at Jack, we have humans to help us face these challenges, to show us that sometimes the craziest solution is the right solution. Blue floated up to the platform. If I may demonstrate. They pulled out their own drink container, filled with their species' crystalline nutrient solution. Hold my beer. The crowd roared with laughter and approval. More beings pulled out containers, their own versions of the now famous phrase. The hall filled with hundreds of voices, all saying the same thing in their own ways. Jack watched it all, feeling proud not just of how humans had changed the galaxy, but how the galaxy had accepted them. Sure, they were Deathworlders. Sure, they did crazy things, but sometimes crazy was exactly what you needed. The ceremony ended with a new addition to the Galactic Council's official protocols. When standard procedures fail, and when careful planning reaches its limits, Look to the humans, and if you hear one say, "Hold my beer," prepare yourself, for you are about to see the impossible become possible. As the crowds began to leave, Blue turned to Jack. "So, what's next for us dangerous Deathworlders?" Jack smiled, looking out at the stars through the station's huge windows. "Oh, you know us humans. There's always another challenge to face, another impossible problem to solve." He pulled out his drink container. "Want to help make the galaxy a more interesting place?" Blue's form shifted to the confident blue shade that had become their trademark. They raised their own container in response. Together, human and alien, they spoke the words that had become a symbol of hope throughout the galaxy. "Hold my beer."